So hello, my name is Christine Chong. Today is Thursday, February 27th, 2025. It is 12:23 p.m. Pacific time. I am conducting this interview virtually from Long Beach, California. I am here with Yon Pak, who is conducting this interview virtually from New York City, New York. So hello, thank you, Sue, for conducting this interview with me for the PANAAWTM Oral History Project.
Thank you for having me. I'm delighted to have this opportunity to share.
Tell me your name, where and when you were born, and a little bit about your childhood.
Right. My name is Yon Pak. Um, I was born in Seoul, Korea. Do I have to say when I was born? 1960. I guess
Yeah.
that outs me as almost 60, well, almost 65 this year. Um, Childhood is interesting. It's post-war, so there's a lot of poverty that we experienced, um, including I think our own family. We come from My parents come from northern part of Korea, now North Korea. Both of them came as refugees, lost everything really. My mother comes from a very wealthy background, and for her, the trauma of losing everything overnight was pretty tremendous. And I know that she has five other siblings, one of whom remained in North Korea because she was married. She didn't come down with the whole family. So they, through various places, like they went to Busan and then they came back to Seoul. So they settled. My mother and met my father in Seoul, who was at the time in the army. And I think for him, after he came down from North, um, that was one viable occupation is to go in the army. And he did that, and he's a career military. He retired lieutenant colonel before we immigrated to the United States. So that's my childhood is knowing him as someone in the military who was often absent because he was traveling. My mother ran a pharmacy, yakuk, which is it says pharmacy, but it has everything. It's got everything, including shampoo, toothpaste. It's your five and dime, I guess, general store that focuses on. I mean, she also dispensed medicine, um, but there was like lipstick and nail polish and all sorts of other things that you might find. I guess that's like CVS or something before. And she also was a Eastern herbalist. So she had a whole cabinet in the main and the first floor room, a big cabinet in the back with little drawers with all sorts of herbs, which I used to frequently visit. One drawer with ginseng, and I would pop the dried ginseng in my mouth like it was candy. So that's how I grew up. You know, Again, it was, if I think back, I didn't feel at the time that I was lacking anything. But as I think back, it's a very bleak kind of childhood because I know that my parents were financially not comfortable, and yet they try so hard to send us all to private school and ways to kind of give something better for their children, which is one of the reasons why we all came to the United States in 1971, sponsored by my aunt who came here as I guess, a foreign nurse student exchange as a nurse in the fifth, late 50s. I think she came here. So yeah, I mean, I think my childhood is filled with lots of irreverent fun. We played on the streets, we ran around causing havoc. Um, yeah, with friends, with my brother, my sister. I have one older brother, two younger sisters. My youngest was a baby, So we didn't really play with her because she was much younger. But it just a lot of, I think, fond memories of almost careless. And if you're like in the majority of like who you are, and we're all Koreans and they're all Koreans, then you actually don't, that kind of second guessing who you are doesn't exist. And I remember like not having that at all. So such confidence and such sense of like entitlement, and not in a negative sense, but I'm entitled to all that is here. It's mine. Although that was very little that we had, but it didn't matter because we didn't see the kind of either racial or otherwise. Um, of course, there's gender tension because that's another story, but we didn't see that. And in my identity, I think it was so much more confident and clear as who I am. Um, which changes when I come to the United States. Then you are totally second guessing everything who you are, not knowing who you are, and because all of a sudden you're thrown into a world that is so foreign.
Wow, thank you. And to clarify, when you mentioned the war, you mean the Korean War from 1950 to 53?
Right.
And so it sounds like your migration to the United States was a very pivotal moment and a like transition. Can you describe a formative experience for you growing up or when you moved to the US and also still developing as a young person?
Oh, formative experience. Maybe not one, maybe several, but if I was to um, like being thrown in day one. I mean, I have actually I write poetry, and I have like a triptych of poetry that I talk about the first 3 days of being the day we leave, and then the day we land, and then like 3 days kind of thing. Because I think because it was so it's ingrained in my brain. I was 10 years old, so I wasn't that old, but I wasn't that young, and I remember the feelings of all that and puzzlement, but not doom. It was still like we're here for an adventure. I'm going on an adventure. Um, and it doesn't hit me that this adventure is not fun until the first day of school,
Mm.
right? Because until then, we're still with our family. We are with my aunt's family. And although my cousin didn't speak Korean, so we couldn't communicate, there was a lot of hand movement, but we're still in a safe space of a home. And we're still family and we're together. And so it was still like, oh, we're here for adventure. How fun. We get to learn English, whatever that means, because we did speak a word of it. But it doesn't quite sink into my psyche um, until I get dropped off at the front door, at the in my classroom on the fifth floor. I mean, as a fifth grade, first day, and I know nothing. No one explained anything to me. My uncle um, took us there. He enrolled us, and my mom didn't know. My father didn't know. Nobody knew. They lived out in Long Island. We live in the city, so he doesn't know what happened in the city. So we get dropped off into this classroom where you walk in and everybody's looking at you because I guess we were late because we had to go to the principal's office and get all the paperwork done. So I walk in late by myself and something happens. And then I was seated at the very back of the room and by myself. I have no idea what's going on. And a lot of gesturing, and then they used to have these cards, these, I don't know if you had those. It's like these are worksheets, but they were like these laminated cards you pull out and then you answer the questions on your workbook or something, and then when you're done you put it back and then you get the next card. And somebody brought some card over and gesture just something, and I know nothing. I'm looking at, I have no idea what anything is. I'm sitting there. And then lunchtime happens. I guess I didn't know. And they were lining up. And so I just line up with everybody else because, I mean, I talk about this a lot. I had to read bodies because I don't
Mm.
understand English. So you're just like nunchi ba, right? You're with your everything is done with nunchi because you don't know, you can't hear or speak. So everything is like you're trying to figure things out by looking, right? And we go to the we go to the cafeteria and we're all getting in line. So I get in line and the lunch lady says something to me and I have nothing. I don't have money. I don't have a lunch card. I have nothing. Nobody told me. So I'm standing there and then she's like annoyed and because I'm holding up the line. So she told me to stand aside and they were doing something and why this something. I mean, all I can think is I'm guessing that they had to get somebody to tell me that I could eat lunch and yeah, I remember. I mean, I write about this actually because it's a one of the pivotal, not pivotal. Pivotal means you pivot to something else. I think formative, maybe more of a close word. That yeah. I mean, I'm standing there, and all my classmates are going through, and just like so embarrassed, like shame about you almost being made a example of, which I don't think that's what they meant, but that's the impact of it on me standing there. This is like I've only been there maybe 3 months and barely understood anything. And after what feels like eternity, they tell me, okay, you can go through and get lunch. And I don't know this kind of food. So I go through, I watch everybody do what they do. And then I sit down and then lunch is over because, the I go to the table, which I think is my table, and then lunch period is over because I was standing there. So, um, yeah, it, one that's one formative experience that I could vividly recall, and I think that um, made me very sensitive to like hospitality, like how you make people, whether you don't mean it, feel like less than nothing because you're just doing what you're supposed to do. I mean, I don't blame this lunch lady. That's what they do. I'm sure they don't want to be dealing with hundreds of kids every lunchtime either. And yeah, so that stays with me. And the lunch scene stays with me quite impactfully.
Can you explain the Korean term you use, nunchi, and what that means?
Mm. Nunchi is like I guess literally means eye measure. You suss out like the situation, and you're supposed to like it's like common sense, but you maybe when you say 눈치, but sometimes you 눈치 봐 when you're trying to assess whether it's danger or not. I mean, there are various way of using it, right? Um, so when you say you don't have 눈치, it means you really have no clue about how things are running.
Mm.
Um, yeah, it means how you measure things up by seeing what's going on,
Mm.
assessing your surroundings, situations, how you might act. And it's a negative thing to say you don't have nunchi. It means you're either rude or you don't have emotional intelligence to understand what's going on or what your response should be.
It sounds like it's very cultural, relational in how
Hmm.
one is understanding like dynamics and
Hmm.
yeah.
Yeah.
And then you also mentioned that like you've written about this experience. Can you share? And you've also mentioned your poetry earlier too. And so yeah, in what kind forms of writing do you do where you share these experiences and reflect on them?
So this particular series, I would say, of poetry I've been writing during the pandemic is with a friend, Alicia Ford, and she and I decided after reading Brown Girl Dreaming, um, that we should try to write from my experience, but from the perspective of that age that I am, right? So I was 10 years old. So I don't write as a 60-year-old woman reflecting on my 10-year-old self, but what did a 10-year-old see? I mean, it's just not always perfect, right? Because you're always meaning making all the time. So, but what it does is just opens up details you haven't noticed before, even if I'm telling my own story and trying really hard not to um, like reflect back on the experience, but trying to be in that body of a 10-year-old and see what do you see as a 10-year-old? And so that was sort of the exercise. And I've done this as I was 5-year old and a subsequent age that I am. And so that's been an exercise that's been very um, challenging in a certain sense because, you know, people who do theology are always meaning making and narrativizing, but always from a perspective of looking back, especially if you're talking about memory. Um, and so it was trying to challenge that impulse and really resist that very comfortable way of thinking through a situation and revisiting that particular and try to remember what was I feeling, what did I see, what did I smell, and this that exercise of, and of course it does slip in. I mean, I do, of course, when I do there's always a line there that reads back and does my own thing. But I give myself permission at the end because I have done the work. I feel like I have done the work of getting there, and it's not a easy reflection, but actually staying with the 10-year-old child or 5-year-old child. But then as always at the end, there's something like what Japanese colonial power coming in. Like no 5-year-old's thinking about that, right? But I felt like I could slip that in because I deserve it. I deserve to have that line. So it's always like that negotiation that I do with myself. It's sort of self-tricking, I guess, in a certain sense.
Oh, that's so wonderful. And, it sounds like you are traversing like timelines and perspectives and positionalities when you're talking about your writing
Mm,
process. And that resonates with me also with like what it means to be in diaspora. And so I'm
mm,
curious if you could share a little bit about your own, yeah, proximity or relationship to Korea or Koreanness being in the diaspora.
mm. You know, I said this to somebody um, in my conversation, and I can't recall who with whom I said this, but my Koreanness, because our life was so filtered through and formed by and negotiated with Korean immigrant church. That was our home life. So I have my school life, which was totally separate from my home life. I could not find way to integrate it. That was so hard to integrate. And then when I was home on Sundays, went to church, and I had a whole nother world that's very separate from sometimes even from home life, church life, home life, and then school life, right? There are three intersecting and sometimes touching the borders, but sometimes very, very far apart. But being a good Korean was being a good Christian. Like that was how I now I received it, how I received it now. I mean, now this is like thinking back on that and with its theologies of an immigrant church that was fairly conservative, that actually went even more conservative. Um, we had a we had we went to a church which was like the second Korean church that was in New York. One was in Manhattan. This was in Flushing, and the pastor was fairly liberal minded, believe it or not. Um, I think he was educated at Union. I mean, I can't remember. I remember looking back. He was so open minded, and he taught me the first thing I learned about baseball was he took us. You know, we were, I don't know, 11, 12 years old or whatever, the youth group to Mets game because he loved baseball, right? I mean, it's, I think if we were in that setting longer, I think I would have a very different formative experience. But so that was what going to church was, very social, maybe some gospel, but very social. This is where I met friends and we hung out together. We had fun, we gossiped, but what about or whatever, whatever. Then came a very dynamic 전도사, who's like somebody who is not ordained yet, and he worked with youth and college students and very charismatic, very dynamic. And the church split over his ordination. And we went with him because my father was an elder, sided with him. And so the church split and we went off somewhere else. And he was ordained and he then turned to, he then was drawn to more Pentecostal, charismatic type of theology and practice. And that's that's where my formation really happened because I stayed with him for a very long time, right through my college years. And it gave me a total sense of belonging and home, gave me confidence that I didn't have in my immigrant life. There I was somebody, there I could express this, there I had a community, there I had friends who we could talk about anything. So it was life-giving, absolutely life-giving. Um, but I think, buying into all the theology that was not life-giving, that I didn't realize was not life-giving until I came out of it. And then I realized that I could no longer um, be part of the community that had such um, perspectives on women, LGBT, and other marginalized communities. And so I left the church, and ever since I left that church, I was wandering around for 40 years. And so when you ask me about diasporic Koreanness, you know, I struggled with that. What happens when your Koreanness, what it means to be Korean, is totally tied to your Christian identity? Because to be a good Christian was to be a good Korean, and vice versa. And you remove yourself from that community that gave you that life, and you can't ever find a replacement for that community for all sorts of reasons. Um, so yeah, so that, I mean, sure, I'm still Korean American, and I find other ways to engage that. Certainly, studying Korean American theology was one way of bringing in the Korean concept of Koreanness into theologizing. Was certainly one other way of thinking about it. Um, and of course, there's familial and they're relational. And of course, there are my parents who still was in that world to a certain extent, and um, perhaps a bridge for me to that world. Um, yeah, I'll stop there for now. I have a lot of other thoughts about like subsequently what it means. I claim myself culturally and theologically and otherwise. But then, then you talk about ancestors, where you actually reclaim the ancestors that we haven't claimed for a long time. So it's almost like I can skip. I mean, maybe this is considered spiritual bypassing. I don't know, but you have the community here, but you remove yourself from the community and you're sort of skipping over to your ancestral generation for that connection. And I ask myself the ethics of that, right? Or efficacy of that, or the honesty of that, or all those things, right? Because yeah, and on the one hand, on the other hand, why not, right? So yeah, I just sit with, it's not a comfortable either way, either or. I
Mm,
just sit with that even as I, really draw on my grandmother, just particularly through my mother's line, um, who I've never met, but I'm sure she's with me. I mean, that's um, it's always been a very powerful she's always been a very powerful presence in so many ways. Yeah, so is that bypassing? Is that not wanting to deal with what's in front of us? Well, what is it?
mm,
I don't know.
mm. Can you share a little bit more about, you use the term bypassing. I hear like tension, right? In what you're saying of like, like how you phrase it as like maybe skipping a generation to go back and
Hmm.
reconnect. And
Hmm.
so,
Hmm.
what feels at stake or tense in, or what
Hmm.
is not being confronted when you mention bypassing?
Hmm. Um, it's easy, right? It's easier to say, I'm not going to deal with people of my generation or even my parents' generation who are here. I mean, I deal with my parents' generation. I mean, my last 12 years, 15 years have been dealing with my parents' generation. So I need to give myself a break about that. But like the immigrant churches or the Korean Americans who are here, in terms of finding my own connection to Korean American identity or community, rather than finding it here, I'm looking at the ancestor as my community. And is that an easy way to not have to work out whatever I need to work out with people who are here,
Mm,
right? And
mm,
so, um, maybe yes, maybe no, because I have plenty of relationships here, but it's always sitting. And I think any reclamation work that we think about, I think about that. It's like, why are we so interested in that, and what is driving that, and what is the purpose of that? Um, Especially when you're going straight to the ancestry,
mm, mm,
because one could do reclamation work with each other,
mm,
right? Um, but yeah, yeah. So I mean, I'm just sitting with that.
mm. Thank you for processing that like in progress together. And you already started to share a little bit about, I think, the landscape of your spiritualities when you talk about your ancestral reclamation work. And I'm wondering if you could share about your spiritual and religious affiliations, in addition to the Korean Christian immigrant church, and ancestral connection. If there are others that
Hmm.
you would like to share about.
Yeah, I mean, I'm like cradle Presbyterian from both sides of my family. Um, Knew nothing but Presbyterianism for a very long time. But of course, Korean Presbyterianism is not really Presbyterianism as we know it. It's an amalgamation and combination and of all denominations that have been missionized. I mean, it's not as clear as we like to see. Even I think denominations now here in this day and age, there's a lot of crossover. what we think like Lutherans are like this or UCC are like that. Of course, there are some characteristics, but I think there's more mixing that's going on uh, than we like to believe. So yeah, that's one like that's a lineage that I draw on, and even now the hymns that I grew up singing would be probably the last thing in my dying breath. That would probably the
Mm,
one that will remain, right?
mm,
Because it shaped and formed me in such profound ways. Whether or not I like the theology of the hymns, but the music and the connection that it brings in singing the hymns is something that I don't know any other post that community experience. I would say that I will carry with me. So there's that. Um, I've been formed and shaped in many of the mainline Presbyterian churches, and I am still Presbyterian at heart. However, I've been my partner Kathy is Roman Catholic, and I attend services. And if I had to choose, I would choose to attend the Catholic church
mm,
service mass. I got really tired of words.
mm,
The primacy of words was, I think, although I love beautifully crafted sermons, and it makes my heart sore, all that. Words are so finite and it's a blunt instrument. Even as I'm saying, well, I like to write poetry and I like to think about, certain words that have certain effect. And I think it's so limited, and we have such primacy of word as the place that, um, yeah. For my own spiritual, where I am is like I want no words. Even prayers, like I want no words. I want to pray with just opening my heart and just feeling the heart open. But we're all supposed to pray something out loud, right? And so I mean in the Catholic service there are a lot of prayers that we recite together, which um seems like words, but it's more ritual, and it's almost beyond the words. So it's a very strange, like I don't think about it like I am thinking about it, but it's a very different, it's like almost chanting, right? It has a different quality about it. I've been very impacted by the Catholic spirituality, and even like my contemplative practice are stem from Catholic spirituality. Um, Particularly Benedictine, that I am drawn to, um, in terms of like contemplative and mysticism and those practices. I really appreciate the what is it, ora et labora, prayer and work, rhythm of the Benedictines. So so that's on one side. So that's like, and then the other side is the meditations that I've been doing with the Buddhist meditations, and learning about the texts. You and I discussed like, oh my gosh, there's so many texts that I don't know. I mean, they all come out of the blue, and I don't know. It's just like it's overwhelming. Um, so I currently have a teacher who's guiding me through all this, who um, has been ordained in multiple lineages and doesn't really stick to any lineage. So she's very open to um, multiple readings and multiple, drawing from multiple traditions of Buddhism. So that's currently what my practice looks like. If I can't sleep at night, like wake up at 3, usually I don't know why 3 o'clock, wake up at 3 for whatever, I turn on her Dharma talk and I listen. And of course, sometimes I fall asleep. So the next day I have to and go back and listen to where I fell asleep. And it's yeah, that's what and what's I'm laughing to myself so much because that's what my parents did. They always listened to sermons in the tape.
Mm.
My
Mhm.
mother's practice was always had sermons in the car, always had hymns in a cassette tape. Remember those cassette tapes?
Mhm.
In the car that they all duplicate, they have a duplicating machine and they would duplicate famous preachers' sermons and they would send it out and they would share. And then my mom used to duplicate these things all the time and send it out to different, now we have like YouTube, right? So we don't have
Mm.
to duplicate anything. But that's what she did. And she
Mm.
would fall asleep while listening to sermons. And I just laugh at myself because I thought I left that place. Like, I'm like 3 in the morning. I'm listening to Dharma talk to fall asleep because
Mm.
somehow it focuses me and it's just something about it surrounding, like holding me in a way that even if it's challenging, somehow it holds me in a, I don't know. Anyway,
Mm.
how full circle is this? It's just so we're never better than our parents, as I say. And we thought we're, yeah. So
Mm.
that's sort of been my practice,
Mm.
in try to do as much meditation as possible. But yeah.
Mm. Well, as you were, wow, there's so much richness here. And when you're talking about like sometimes words not being enough, or like in your contemplative practices, it reminds me of your work, what you wrote, Woman at the Well, is it? Talk
Oh yeah.
about different ways of knowing and what we
Mhm.
lose in the modern context that privileges certain ways of
Mhm.
understanding, where you make connections to also like Korean spirituality, indigenous and
Mhm.
shamanic spirituality as profound ways of
Mhm.
being and knowing. And I hear that as you're sharing about your spiritual journeys and communities and
Mhm.
returns, I suppose, both ancestral, but
Yeah.
also to your parents, to your point.
Yeah. Well, I haven't thought about that piece for a very long time. How did you dig that up? Oh my goodness.
It's very powerful, Sue. What year? Do you remember what year that was?
19, I was a doctoral student, 97.
Hmm. Wow.
I think I was 97 and 98. Yeah.
I also wanted to ask, so you had mentioned in a prior response that you had left the Korean church, but clearly your spirituality is very intertwined, or has continued. And so I'm curious,
Hmm.
like what that looked like for you, and yeah, what sort of trajectories that you've been a part of from that time when you mentioned like leaving at least a specifically Korean immigrant church.
The I think I could replicate the social part of it with friends, connections. PANAAWTM has been a real wonderful social as well as theological, but friendships, relationships. So I think I might have like because it's about the same time. I mean, this is insight that's coming right now, because I haven't actually thought about this. The timing actually is just so because I left the Korean church as I was entering PANAAWTM.
Mm.
I think I replaced a sense of home that I felt there to PANAAWTM, a sense of home, and I know I did because my very first experience going to PANAAWTM, I was a student at Princeton, doing my Master of Arts in Christian education, and then Dr. Dr. Lee, Ahyun Lee, who was a theology professor there, his wife, Dr. Lee, who's another Dr. Insuk Lee, was part of the planning committee, I think, or was in conversation about the first PANAAWTM at that time, AWT, Asian Women Theologians conference, and we gathered. The first meeting, I think the first thing was at Stony Point, and when I went there, this was like my senior year, last year at Princeton. This is as I'm like transitioning out of that world into this world. That I it was a closing ritual, and I vividly remember we're in a circle, which was again unusual. We don't haven't been in circles, but all these women, their shoes off in this space, and there were women from all parts of Asia, and some from Asia, and some who are studying here who are from Asia, and some Asian American, I think, gathered, and um, they were sharing something, and I don't know what, now remember what the topic was, but they were sharing something, and I've never seen, and some of them are my mother's age, and so my vision, my understanding of like my mother's generation is like my mother, immigrant, struggling to speak English, trying, we are the translator, we are supporting them. It's a, all that. And these women were like so amazingly, beautifully speaking in English in these lofty theological concepts and just so eloquent. I said, it was like a vision of like a new heaven and new earth. I was thinking like, wow, this exists. Because I've never seen this before in my life. And so that's when I was totally hooked. I said, wow, I want to be like them. Right. And having seen that vision, I couldn't go back to the other. I mean, when you see something you can't not see, having seen these powerful women who would so eloquently talk theologically, and they're talking about their own context and the suffering and what they're doing as women, and it's like, wow, the stark difference. um I don't know what the question was, but I know, I know I'm getting there, so I'm just rambling here.
No, it's
So
great.
yeah, so I think PANAAWTM has been that a replacement of my home, but what it could not replace is my spirituality, because it was very academic and very centered in academia. And although we did talk about like Asian women's spirituality, it wasn't a place where I would go to pray or to be formed in that way like you would a church. I mean, I have long-lasting relationship with people who have come and have been a real rock and a home for me. So while that part of my uh, sort of immigrant church life has been supported and replicated in PANAAWTM, the deep spiritual part was very um, like a valley of dry bones. I couldn't find my way out for a long time. I mean, I tried this, I tried that, all sorts of things, but it was only literally 40 years later, because I counted the years. And this is also through my caring for my mother who was dying, who had Alzheimer's, who I was caring for, and that experience with my mother re-entering, because my mother's spirituality is so mystical, and in a sense going into her Alzheimer's world is like a mystical experience, because you're in a liminal space where none of the guideposts and lampposts and landmarks are legible. It's different, and you just had to enter into that space. But that experience with her has brought me back to this mystical and contemplative and spiritual side that I started reclaiming, and not just in like Buddhist meditation, but also even like the Christian spirituality. So it's too long. It just took so long to get there. And but I yeah, so to make that connection, finally to um, I don't have to leave everything, because I think I kind of left the baby with the bathwater, but my mother was constantly pulling me back to the bathwater,
Mm.
or the baby, I should say. You could throw out the bath, not the baby. Go back to the baby, or the preciousness of the baby. That was indeed that
Mm.
connection that helped me to um, reclaim all of it
Mm.
without shame or cringe.
Mm. Mm. Wow. I'm reminded of when you initially shared about your mother and her pharmacy and having like Eastern medicine and that through line as well of her significance as a spiritual and healing presence
Hmm.
in all seasons
Hmm.
or various seasons, perhaps.
Hmm. Hmm. And she was a nurse too, right? I mean,
Mm. Mm-hmm.
she's a pharmacist, and her whole occupation in the U.S. was a nurse.
Mm.
Um, and yeah, so healing is a big part of her, who she is.
And you mentioned, Panadim as also that aligning or offering a pivot, or I'm not a pivot perhaps, but
Formation, I said, yeah.
formation. Yeah. What year was that when you joined Panadim? And can you also describe some of your key roles and experiences in Panadim since you joined as a grad student, it sounds like?
Yeah, so 1985, and the first we met at Yale, I think, to have a planning meeting or something. And then I think the first conference was 86. After the conference, and I made such deep I mean, the mentors, because I was young, I was 25, and these amazing women, I was so hungry for that, like, mentorship, and created long-term relationships. And um but then I got married in in June. I think we had our conference, I can't remember whether it's April or May or something, and then I got married in June, and then went to Scotland for 7 years. So I was totally disconnected for 7 years. After the first, I've only been to the first conference, and then I was gone for 7 years. And then I came back, but at that time it was became autumn, AWTM, and yeah, it was some autumn, or AAWTM. Um, and when I started my doctoral program here at Union and Teachers College, I came back to the then Penn Autumn,
Mm.
and I just attended for a while, and then I don't know what year it was that asked me to join the board, and I did, and um we had a conference here at Union, um let me say 2004, or 2003 or something. Um and then, yeah, on the board, and then when we became 501c3 nonprofit, I became the treasurer. And one of the reason I became the treasurer is we as because we didn't no, sorry. So I became treasurer before 501c3, because we needed a fiscal sponsor to receive funding. And we tried variety of places. The PSR was one fiscal sponsor, and then a nonprofit in Atlanta that Jung Ha ran was another place. And then when that needed, I mean, she was leaving that place, or that place wasn't working out, financial sponsorship moved to Union. So it was at union for several years until we became 501(c)(3), and then it was its own. Like we had our own. And so one of the reasons I was treasurer is because I was managing the funds at union. And then I retired 2 years ago.
Congratulations. That's
Well, I was trying to retire for several years. I think I tried retiring several times, but finally retired, I think 2 years ago, I think.
Mm. So what you've been with PANAAWTM like since like you mentioned right the various name iterations and also organizational structure, and I also imagine the formation right the constituency of generations and also the types of people who have been a part of the community. So
Mm,
what shifts have you noticed, as well as what seems to be some sort of like through lines or just core commitments and enactments by PANAAWTM as a community?
mm. I think, for one thing, the fact that for 36 years, 37 years, we're doing mostly on volunteers. I don't know any other organization that that does that, right? We not only give our uh, time and talent, we also gave our money in terms of like if we were went and did a um, lecture or something and they give us honorarium, we would give it to Pananon. That's how we raised annual. So we had to raise annual budget for the conference every year. So we were just very committed. So I think that commitment, because for each of us, it was a lifeline in so many ways, needed to survive and thrive. So that commitment, I think, is the through line in all these iterations. Um, I think the other thing is, um, for a long time, like mentoring each other and mentoring was also another very important part of it. That value, partly because the early founders had no mentors and they had to figure themselves out, and now we're in a place where at least we have some idea what's happening, that we want to make sure that others have that opportunity. So that mentoring piece is also very, I think, throughout been very important. Um, I think um, we have evolved in a way that we've been a lot more inclusive, right? And I think that piece has not been as successful. So because it started as a academic enterprise, it started with doctoral students in the PhD program. That So that kind of knowledge production in a particular kind of way, in academic way, mentoring people into the academy, another was is still very strong, I think, strong through line. Though we try to make interventions to say, what about ministry? What about ministry? And so I think, or activists and others who um, are in ministry in a variety of different ways, right? I think we tried to do that, um, and I think we'll keep trying. I'm not sure how successful it has been in total integration, and partly it has to do with, I think, founding vision and mission, right? And so that still is in play, and there's some tension around that. Um, the I think that being very heavy East Asian focus, because I mean, that's how it was founded, is another kind of, I think we're trying very hard to expand that, but I think we haven't been as successful in that. I think we in the previous, when we say pen out on women, what does it mean? What do women mean? I mean, we've been talking about gender inclusivity, um, gender non-binary. Um, so that tension between, yeah, women, however you define women, it's still patriarchy. There's still discrimination. There's still all these things happening for women, and we don't. And we don't. It doesn't mean we're going to lose that if we open up for gender nonconforming. So I think the tension of that, the tension between those, that kind of who we are and how we understand ourselves is something that I think we're continuing to wrestle with. Um, so yeah, I mean, what other the name change has been an attempt to be more inclusive every time we move to from AW to Asian women to Asian American women, then theology, I mean, ministry, and then PANAAWTM, which is like Pacific Asian and Asian North American women in theology. It's meant to be in further widening the circle, which is welcome. And I'm not sure we've done a particularly good job of recruiting and making other people, the widening circle, welcome as much as we could.
Mm. Yeah. Um, and as you talk about inclusivity and also like expansiveness, I'm curious for you as a queer woman and as an explicitly interreligious person, how has your experience been in PANAAWTM in relation to those identities and commitments as well?
I have to say, when I went through a divorce, that was a very difficult time, not for me necessarily personally, but because of my children.
Mm,
That my decision to get a divorce um, impacted them in very different ways than it did me, right? And in a certain sense, I didn't have total control over how they're being impacted by that. And I think still in my circles, divorce was not something that happened with frequency at the time. Um, and yet, this was a place where I could be very open
mm,
about it. Similarly, when I had, I became involved with Kathy, and still is my spouse. Um, this was a place where I could, to go where you're Asian and Asian American group, where you don't have to, I didn't have to feel like have to hide myself in any way.
mm.
I mean, as you know, I don't wear a billboard to say I'm queer because I just never, I don't want to be a professional queer person because that's just not who I am. I have no interest in
Mhm,
being that. But I don't have to censor myself. I don't have to like hide myself. I just show up, and
mm,
she shows up with me, and everybody knows her, and it's so good to be not to stand out.
mm,
When you're standing out for various different reasons all the time, and it's just so normalized. Or so it's what I think that's the other place, like in PANAAWTM, I don't stand out
mm,
because like there are many of us like this, and
mm,
that's a wonderful place where you don't stand out, like the hyper visibility that
mm,
we face in our workplaces and other places. Um, yeah. So I
mm,
think to me that's been I know I could always depend on my PANAAWTM colleagues and friends to understand.
mm. That's
Now, if they
really,
didn't understand, I mean, they didn't tell me about it, so I don't know. But at, at least the ones that I'm in communication and conversations with, that was not, it was never an issue.
Mm. It was powerful. I mean, like you could just be, and you were embraced, is what I hear.
Hmm.
Mm. I love that this question is coming sort of very well into our conversation. But can you share and just your current roles? I know you have multiple hats, and so yeah, whichever roles you would like to name, and as well as your journey into these roles, which I also imagine intersect with a lot of the topics and themes we've talked about.
I think my most proud current role is grandmother, and to have two just amazing granddaughters who are both wild and creative and naughty and irreverent and all those things that girls should not be. Though they're all of it. So I'm, you know, I'm kind of proud of that part. I hope they don't get into too much trouble at school, but you know, it's so that is a lot more enjoyable than I had ever imagined. And I think the other piece that is so sweet is, you know, so they're my biological children, and therefore the grandchildren are connected biologically. Kathy has no biological, not don't share any DNA, and yet, they're more close to Nona, Kathy, than they are with me. And for them, they would never see me without her and her without me. And there's something so embracing about children that way. And there's no question and no problem, no, you know, why are two women? It's like this is what it is, right? And also, I mean, we do live in New York City. They have
Mhm.
multiple friends who have two mothers and two fathers, and so I think that has been so sweet and refreshing to see that they would be so connected to her in ways that, and more so, I think Isabel, who is born in the year of the dog, and so is Kathy, they share traits that I'm surprised that they feel like they're like form cut from the same cloth, but they're not. But they understand each other so deeply, which is so funny because they do. So I mean, I think that role is so special, and it's a reminder to me that that's what's important.
Mm.
I mean, I have a big job at school, and it takes all my energy and all that. And at the end of the day, that's just a job. But what matters is, family and my grandchildren and making sure that they, our own commitment to leave the place a little bit better for them, right? And not destroy it for them, which is what we are doing right now. So, I mean, so that is the role that I'm most proud of. My day job as the academic dean at Union is all consuming in so many ways. And I didn't know that I would ever take this job. I was very happy doing my own thing. Previously, I was running field education and teaching in that, and I could create programs, and I was loving that job. And I was sufficiently, I've done it long enough to almost like coast, therefore do other exciting projects. Um, but when they asked me to be the academic dean, I had to really stop and think and say, do I want to give that all up for this? This is my third year into this position, and um, yeah, I feel like this is also a calling, my vocation. Um, and for me, it's about care, and it's like whatever I do in my personal practice. Um, there's this whole thing about the meditation about everyone is your mother. Everything is your mother, right? Like
Mm.
you treat even the people who are really annoying you, you're my mother. You're my mother. Is that um, mantra meditation that helps me when things are challenging. And this job is plenty challenging in so many ways. Um, but, you know, it's also a way to shape a community of faculty, shape the community here at Union. Um, I think model and live into the kind of leadership that I want to espouse. I don't always get it right, but try again. Um, Creating good communication and colleagues to work with, so important.
Mm.
And especially now, with all these executive orders threatening on all sides, we drill down to our basics. What is our mission? What is our mission? What is our mission? What is ours to do? And really drilling down and living into that. If we're about justice and love, and it's about training people, that's what we need to be doing. We need to be training people, right? Um, and then how do we create a community where we're not fighting with each other, because this is what they want you to do in fighting, but to create spaciousness and understanding and compassion, um, to be able to lift each other up. And it's a very hard job. It's a tall order. I don't always know what to do, but
Mm.
I know that what we need to do is clear.
Mm.
How we do it, not so clear. But we're figuring that out.
Mm. Yeah, and you've been at Union, right, for quite a while, both as a student and faculty, dean. What has motivated and or sustained you to stay at Union or to do this work at Union?
I think that's a good question. What sustained me? I think I believe in, no institution is perfect, but I believe in the place in a sense that if we could make it happen, if something can happen, it can happen here, right? And it's usually driven by our students. And I think what sustains me is the kind of students who are here. And I hear them, I see what they're doing, who they are, and it's so inspiring to hear what they're doing or what their dreams are and how they want to change the world. And I think for me, my job has been like follow what they're saying and support them. Like, how do we put all the supports around them so they could flourish? Um, we have brilliant colleagues who are doing exciting work and breaking all kinds of barriers in that sense. And I really appreciate that kind of intellectual soup, or the water that we're living in. And that's sort of like a baseline. And uh, I think the students really, um, I think for me, they lead the way.
Mm. Mm. I can say I've experienced what you just expressed, like as a former student, alum, and under, I think, your care as a faculty and staff at Union. So thank you for that. And I'm curious for you, like, what is a core community or figure during your time at Union that you would like to share about or that has shaped you?
So if I was to think of one person, it was Jim Hayes, who was the Dean of Administration when I first started as right after I finished my doctoral degree, I was the Dean of Students, and he was my supervisor. And he is a Southern gentleman from North Carolina who always wore a bow tie and gay male who came to New York young to escape his North Carolinian, you know, community, found himself somehow to Union. And he was both very generous and gave me a lot of space to run with things. He would always tease me that I had way too many things going on. And when I would do something that didn't like was out of my role or I stepped in somebody else's role, which I tend to do a lot, I just kind of like butt in and start doing things that's not mine to do. He would say, "No, that's not you." So he would sort of gave me the space to really fly and do flourish, and gave me this boundary to say, "Those are not your that's not your role,
Mm,
and so should be doing that, and you don't make that decision."
mm,
And it sounded harsh at times, but looking back, I think I've learned so much about administration and management um, through his mentorship. And that's who if I remember, like one person that stands out. And, he passed away, I want to say 4 or 5 years ago. And I did visit him when he moved out to North Carolina after retired. And I did visit him down there and had meals with him. And when he would come out to New York, I would visit him. But
mm,
yeah, I mean, he really um, taught me so much about what it means to be a leader. As somebody who he always shied away from that, but he was very clear about, he was always laughing at me. I would run into his office and I said, "Do you know what's going on here? This is so and so is saying this, so and so is saying this. Shouldn't you do something? This is what's going on. You should act on, shouldn't you?" I'm like, "Ugh." And he was like, "Sue, you have your ears so close to the ground that you should be working for Langley Hill, CIA." So I would run into his office like, "You know what thing's happening?" And I have all my theories, and he just sits there and listens, like and shake his head. It's like,
mm.
mm-hmm.
I love that story. And perhaps in the spirit of Jim Hayes, his name, with Panada having marked its 40th anniversary last year in 2024, but a lot of the celebration and commemoration is happening this year in 2025. What would you like? What advice or perhaps insights would you want to offer to Panadam at this time? And I say that very broadly. But yeah, I feel like the 40th year is very significant in many cultures, and so having been a core part of Panadam since its formation, yeah, if you were to challenge Jim Hayes, what would you impart to the Panadam community?
um, you know, I uh, I like to ask this question, what time is it?
Hmm.
Um, Because every institution, organization, especially one that's been around for a long time, have to constantly ask, what time is it? I think the time we're in now, I don't remember that we've been in this kind of time in the last 40 years. Maybe I'm forgetting some parts of it, but I don't think so. Um, so really thinking about what is ours to do, what is our lane, what time is it, and really wrestling with that. And it may mean upending all sorts of things, or it may mean strengthening so many different things. Um, yeah, what time is it? And that's a diagnostic question too.
Mm. So your question of what time is it? It reminds me of Grace Lee Boggs and James Boggs, who've asked, "What time is it on the clock of the world?"
Mm,
And how Grace Lee Boggs has been invoked as an ancestor for many of us in PANAAWTM, at least in our
hmm
shared time and
hmm
work at Union
hmm
too.
hmm
And so that's really, yeah, resonating strongly, especially given the conditions of our current context.
hmm
And so, is uh, my final question is, what would you like to impart? I can say whether as a legacy or remembrance to the generations to come in your field and communities of care. So I had asked specific about Panadam, but I given your multiple roles and commitments. What would you like to see, or what would you like those you consider communities to either continue on or to imagine?
I mean, I think I always go back to the basics when I think about imagining, and that's to do with community and communal care. Um, I've been wrestling with this question, and we are actually at a faculty meeting yesterday. We're talking about how do we create, because we individually, when we do contemplative practice and I mean, just meditation and like Buddhist reflections on how do you decenter yourself, right? How are things all interconnected, and that yourself is um, dissolved or displaced and not centered, right? And um, what does it mean to do that as a community? What does a communal self-emptying look like? Communal emptying look like? I mean, self in a more plural way. So that's something I want to continue to explore, and I would hope that um, that generations will continue to explore. I mean, we've done this for thousands of years on one level, but what does it look like now? Because without that, I think it's very hard to, or can you do the kind of outward looking work without the internal
Mm,
work? So I'm saying internal, but not just self-internal, but communal internal work. And what
mm,
does that look like? And I would imagine that also be for PANAAWTM too.
mm,
What does PANAAWTM internal work look like as we live into the next 40 years? Um, because we so need it. We so need it. If we're gonna be good for anyone outside, or you know, we have to know, we have to be sustained and um, do that work that keeps us both um, open malleable, vulnerable to each other.
Mm,
I think that's a difficult word, vulnerability, because it's
mm,
also been weaponized in certain ways. But I mean in terms of spiritual sense too, that open vulnerability. Um, yeah, what does that community look like?
mm. Thank you. That's really profound. Is there anything else that you would like to add, or are there any questions that perhaps I should have asked or you would like to respond to?
No, no, this is, I mean, thank you for this. I think it's you're kind of leading me in this conversation that I was able to kind of have new insights I haven't thought about as I'm talking to you, and it's just all coming out. It's like, oh, I haven't thought about it that way. So
Mm.
this has been a wonderful experience of um, sharing and connecting in this way.
Mm. Thank you, Sue. Yes, I just want to thank you so much for your generosity and your vulnerability in sharing about your journeys and your experiences. And I'm sure there's like so much more to your story. There is, but even from this short time, that there's so much profound resourcing and wisdom that I've received, and I know that many others, especially in our PANAAWTM community, will. So, thank you.
Thank
So
you.
this will conclude our February 27, 2025 interview with Sue Yon Pak. So Sue, thank you for participating in this project.
Thank you for including me.